All right. Here we go. Hey, everyone, and welcome to the Webline, a podcast about Spider-Man and his amazing world. Here, we discuss all aspects of our favorite web slinger in a fun, informal, but informative forum. I'm your humble host, the Spidey Librarian, and I hope you're having an excellent day as you find your way to this episode. Before we get started, I'd like to make a quick announcement. Episode 4 of the podcast has not yet made it to audio formats. I apologize for this and should hopefully be getting it along with this episode out in the next day or so. So, fans of the podcast will get 2 episodes together. Once again, I apologize for the delay and thank you for your understanding. I'd also like to announce a decision I've come to with regards to the interval of this podcast. The webline is produced on a mostly weekly schedule. With the recent unintended break, I've come to realize that perhaps a break every few episodes would be warranted. So, every 4 to 6 episodes, I'll be taking a week off from the podcast to recharge and work on other content. In today's episode, I'll be undertaking the first of many retro reviews. These episodes will feature myself discussing and reviewing the prodigious backlog of Spider-Man media, including the films, shows, and video games. Today's retro review will focus on Sam Raimi's 2002 film Spider-Man, which kicked off the Walt Crawler's live-action life on the big screen. But before we do a daring dive into our timely topic, it's time to dish on the latest Spiderific developments with our knockout news segment, the Bugle News Flash. For our first news item, the release date for Spider-Man Beyond the Spider-Verse is already in doubt. Now, this piece came out a little over a week ago, but one of the animators, actually a group of 4 of the animators, has come forth and stated that only a small fraction of the work for the next chapter was done. Beyond the Spider-Verse has only just entered production, and they're saying that there's no way that the movie will be finished in time for 2024 at all, to say nothing of, I think March was the intended release date, March of 2024. They say to expect a 2026 release date at the soonest. And to be fair, Lord and Miller have been asked about this, and they have been very kind of non-committal about what the release date will actually be. They've essentially said, we'll take whatever time we need to make sure that the movie is really good, and they're not unwilling to push it back. So that's neither a confirmation nor a denial. Again, it's a very non-committal answer, but it's not exactly the kind of news that people who really enjoyed Across the Spider-Verse want to hear, especially after we got the news that the next part was going to be in March of next year. However, in a somewhat related piece of news, apparently conditions behind the scenes for Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse were not great, at least for some animators. The idea seems to be that a lot of the friction came from changes in what was needed to be animated. Now, this isn't something uncommon to animated movies, TV shows, stuff like that. Changes happen all the time. However, these changes apparently came really late in the process, after entire scenes had been finished, and then they were suddenly scrapped. And so suddenly, some of these animators were told or were allegedly working 11-hour days for 7 days a week for weeks at a time in order to kind of keep up and, basically make the difference. The animators, at least the spokesperson for them, seem to blame Philip Lord for most of the delays, saying that he's the one that was making all the last minute changes and demanding that the scenes get finished in time. But the counterweight to this news is that this is a group of 4 animators out of possibly hundreds, and many other animators don't really share this assessment. They basically say that they enjoyed working on the film, that they really liked it, that they had a good time. Um, and I'm sure we can have two things be true at the same time, where we have some animators who thought this was a great process, and then others who thought, I feel worked to the bone, I don't feel appreciated. And it kind of highlights why protections for workers in, not just the film industry, which is one of the reasons that I support the writers' strike, for instance, and SAG-AFTRA's strike. But like just the behind the scenes people too, they need these kinds of protections so that way you don't have experiences like these going on with the films. So protect your workers and support the writers' strike. All right, and that's all the Spidey news there is for this week. All right, now let's get into the main segment. We are going to go ahead and do a retro review of 2002's Spider-Man. This movie debuted in, of course, 2002, and I feel like I have to mention the year for this movie just because it's simply called Spider-Man. It's Sam Raimi working for Sony. The movie stars Peter Parker, Kirsten Dunst, Willem Dafoe, Clifford Robertson, and Rosemary Harris, and James Franco. A very good cast on this film, and when it premiered back in the summer of 2002, I think it was late May 2002. Reception was great. This movie was praised for its direction, for its acting, for a lot of the kind of similarity to the comics. I wouldn't say faithfulness, because there are many changes that are made to the source material, but that's okay. I don't have a problem with that. When you switch mediums, you are going to have to make some necessary changes to the source material anyway. The plot basically centers around young Peter Parker, who gets bitten by a spider at, excuse me. Sorry, I want to say Oscorp Industries. Was it Oscorp Industries? They were on a field trip, and he gets bitten by a spider that has been genetically altered, which that's already a change from the source material of the comic, because the spider had originally been hit with a dose of radiation before it bit Peter. Anyways, he stumbles into some spider powers as a result, and after making a selfish decision that results in the death of his uncle, has to learn to use his powers for others and not necessarily for himself. And in doing so, he becomes the superhero Spider-Man, pitting him against the Green Goblin, played by Willem Dafoe. And I can see a comment in the chat from YT User who says that Dafoe stole the movie. And I will certainly want to talk about Willem Dafoe as we get further into the episode here. So that is the plot. We're going to do a little bit of character analysis. And before we get into that, I do want to say that kind of my take, I had the opportunity to view this movie again recently. And of course, I really enjoyed it. I can't tell you how many times I've seen this movie. I think I saw it at least 3 or 4 times in the movie theater. Loved it, could not get enough of it. And I just remember being so very kind of overwhelmed with how much I loved it. I grew up reading the comics. I think I started reading them around the time that Carnage had come onto the scene. And so I had started reading comics, the earlier comics. I read Amazing Fantasy 15 through reprints. I watched all of the animated shows. I'm a little Spider-Man nerd, which probably explains why I have a podcast like this. But um, there was a lot. There was a lot to this movie that it does a really good job of giving viewers kind of the condensed comic book experience and taking a lot of big beats and milestones from Peter's career in the comic books as a superhero and then making changes to them and repackaging it for an audience that did not grow up on the comics and basically giving them an experience that would translate well to kind of what they would relate to. In doing so, it also preserves kind of the original feel, the zeitgeist, if I may, of the comics, and makes it so that those who grew up reading the comics understand, oh, well, this isn't exactly what it was before, but we've got an experience that is close enough that I still feel rewarded as a comic book reader, and I really do feel like Sam Raimi just kind of knew the character. He loved this character and really did a fantastic job of making the translation from film to, or from, I'm sorry, from comic book to film. Uh, Spider-Man basically had an excellent reception as a result. Again, the acting was praised, the direction was praised, the visual effects, the score, and I believe that made it the first movie to reach $100 million in a single weekend, and definitely the most successful film that was based on a comic book at the time. And this is probably about a year or two right after the X-Men movie had come out. So it was yeah, it sorry, I've got my notes up, but it did reach $100 million in a single weekend. So anyways, Spider-Man's portrayal in this movie by Tobey Maguire is pretty good. I will definitely say that, and I know that we see a lot of this on the internet these days, that Tobey Maguire was an excellent Peter Parker. And he was. He had the look down. He had the kind of he was definitely an outcast, and you definitely saw that sense of longing that that an outsider might feel, the desire to belong, the desire to maybe, be attractive to the opposite sex. You can tell that he's got his eye on it on Mary Jane the entire movie. And she seems to, I mean, she knows that he's there, but she doesn't really seem to know much more than that until he starts walking around a bit more confidently, which seems to be the result of getting the spider powers. So you have a lot of that kind of social, not just the nerdy nice kid, and which again, Tobey Maguire does an excellent job of portraying, but that longing, that just desire to be accepted, to be, uh, I don't know, to be a part of the social structure. Peter definitely wants that and not only feels that desire, but he also projects a lot of resentment that he's kind of not there. And so Tobey Maguire does an excellent job of that. He does an excellent job of showing how much he really loves Mary Jane, how smitten he is with her. And then we've also got the Peter Parker who is, dare I say, a little bit of a jerk sometimes. And Tobey Maguire did an excellent job of portraying that as well. I One of the things that I really love about the 2002 Spider-Man movie is just how many memes we got from this movie. in the first 10 minutes of the movie, Willem Dafoe delivers his, I'm something of a scientist myself line, which of course has been used over and over in so many memes. It got a callback in Spider-Man No Way Home. That's a classic. But another classic is the line, I missed the part where that's my problem. And most of the uses of that line are, you might get a sound clip of it, and that is usually Peter saying it. However, Peter did not originate that line. That line was originated by the guy who was supposed to pay Peter $3,000 for showing up and beating up on Macho Man Savage. And of course, that did not happen. The guy gave him $100 and told him to beat it. And as that guy gets stuck up and his money, the robber takes his money and he's running away, he runs right past Peter, who lets him go. And the guy told him, you could have stopped him. Why didn't you stop him? Now he's going to get away with my money. And Peter says, to throw it back in his face, he says, I missed the part where that's my problem. And that's the delivery that people will use in memes. And I get it. It makes all the sense in the world. But let's not deny that Peter, both in the comics and in this movie, is a little bit of a jerk at first. Again, there's that desire to belong, but there's also that resentment to people who have just kind of shunned Peter and kept him from being a part of kind of the accepted social order of things. Now, as we know, that jerkiness kind of leads to a bad end for Uncle Ben. It turns out that the robber tried to get away using Uncle Ben's car and is the one that shoots him. And Peter comes out onto the scene. He finds his Uncle Ben lying down. He's bleeding. There's people surrounding him, and we get a very touching and fairly traumatic scene where Peter is, he watches his uncle as he dies, and Uncle Ben's last words is Peter's name. He just keeps saying Peter, and then he just kind of fades away. Then we see Peter go after him. We have angry Peter now, who is just incensed that someone took the life of his uncle. He doesn't know who it is yet. And when he finds him, he realizes, oh my God, I let this guy get away. And that brings us to the portion, perhaps the most kind of character-defining moment for both Peter and, of course, Spider-Man, because this leads him to becoming Spider-Man and not for a profit. So you have, this kid who realizes that he made a terrible decision and essentially kind of, is somewhat responsible for his uncle's death. And now he's like, oh God, I need to atone for this, which is where we get Spider-Man. So he goes around saving people, trying to make sure that he is able to keep people from suffering the same fate as his uncle did. And it's a very moving portrayal, and I think that both Tobey Maguire and Sam Raimi deserve a lot of praise for this kind of portrayal, because clearly there was a lot of discussion that went on between the two about how we're going to play this scene, what we want to happen, and we come away with a performance that hews pretty darn closely to the comics. Now, the comics did not portray Uncle Ben's death. Uncle Ben was actually killed off panel in Amazing Fantasy 15, and Peter just kind of goes off after the burglar, because it wasn't a robber, it was a burglar. Same thing, but slightly different circumstances. So, but I think that a lot of that comes down to, again, knowing the source material and then translating it in a way that is going to resonate with audiences. And I feel like Tobey Maguire just does an amazing job of doing that. YT User says that it had a lot of tension when Peter's alter ego was discovered to the point of being very tense and uncomfortable. Well, and that's the thing. Like, these characters are characters in conflict with themselves. And I feel like one of the reasons that people say that, Tobey Maguire was a great Peter Parker, Andrew Garfield was a great Spider-Man, and, Tom Holland nailed them both, is simply because, there's a certain emphasis, I feel, on very specific conflicts. And I feel like Tobey Maguire's really is on Peter Parker. I feel like without Peter Parker, you just don't have a great Spider-Man. You have to have a great Peter Parker in order to have a great Spider-Man. And so Tobey Maguire clearly put a lot of effort into making sure he delivered that, and it works very well. Now we get into costume here, and this is where I feel like for the most part, Tobey Maguire does a fine job. He does a serviceable job as Spider-Man in costume. He does great in a lot of scenes. However, and I bring this up because it is kind of there always seems to be a quip quotient that people want from their Spider-Men, and I'm fine with that. Using his smart aleck mouth to kind of distract his opponents has always been part of, Spider-Man's appeal as a superhero. And I just feel like he didn't do a whole lot of joking in this movie, which is fine. He doesn't have to much. But the thing is, a couple of those quips, they just did not land with me. And what was it? I think when the Green Goblin just very hilariously and dramatically breaks down J. Jonah Jameson's office and is cackling and is like, Jonah, tell me who the person is that gives you these photos of Spider-Man. That one, I think that scene is unintentionally hilarious. I thought that was just really funny when that happened. I could not stop from laughing. But there's a point where Spider-Man shows up, Jonah's like, you two are in cahoots, and then Peter just Spider-Man just webs his mouth shut and says something like, hold on, kid, the parents are talking, or it's some kind of line like that. And it just did not land right. It felt like it was just kind of read and not really kind of used to kind of help really put Jonah down. Dude, you need to shut up and just let us talk, And so I really kind of feel like that is one of the reasons that, Tobey is, you got to bring him down a little bit, in my opinion, because, again, he does not have to be quippy all the time. Spider-Man definitely isn't quippy all the time, but he is a lot of the time. And that just might be one of the, he didn't have very many opportunities to be quippy in this movie. There just weren't a lot of lines. And to me, that was a big one right there. And it just didn't land. And, it is maybe a quibble. But again, I bring it up because everyone that I encounter online always seems to have no, he wasn't funny enough, he wasn't snarky enough, and I do feel like Tobey didn't really bring that as much as he could have. Again, I don't have that much of an issue with it, but I do have a little bit of an issue with it. So overall, Tobey Maguire was an excellent start to Spider-Man, just in terms of a character, particularly a character mantle that's going to get passed along from one actor to the next actor. I think he did an excellent job of introducing moviegoers to this character, made him, the hero who has great power and has to live up to that responsibility. And I think that it's just kind of one of the things that helped make the movie great. So, from the hero, let's go over and talk about the villain. So, when I saw Spider-Man, I did not know who Willem Dafoe was. And if not for Spider-Man, I probably would have walked away and, I would have walked away not like basically going, "Oh yeah, Willem Dafoe, he played the Green Goblin." About a few months later, I happened to watch the movie The Boondock Saints, in which Willem Dafoe is one of the big stars. And after that movie, I will never forget Willem Dafoe as an actor. And it's caused me to come back and watch Spider-Man and just marvel at how amazing an actor Willem Dafoe actually is. Um, I want to talk a little bit about Norman Osborn and really kind of the similarities between this Osborn from the movies and the Norman Osborn from the comics, because I feel like this is a big deal, and I'm not sure enough people know about it. Particularly if you didn't read the comics. Norman Osborn, in my opinion, is not a bad person. I'm going to let that sink in for a second. Norman Osborn, as he is before he takes the Goblin serum, is not a bad person. He's not exactly a good person either. He is an ambitious businessman, and he is, you get some of the character flaws that come with it. But there are several scenes before he there's at least one scene at the beginning where he meets Peter and demonstrates genuine affection for Peter. He basically is like, "Oh, you're a very smart young man. I like you. You've read my paper. Wow, that's amazing. And you understood it?" Like, Norman is a brilliant scientist. And it really isn't until he takes the Goblin serum that all of his faults, which as he was before, they were manageable. He could sublimate them. He could even probably be brought back by like his son, like remembering, "Oh my God, I have a son. I had a yeah, I had a wife that I maybe once loved." But once he takes the serum, his darker half, which I'm just going to call the Goblin from now on, just kind of emerges and starts basically controlling him. And I really do feel like if you watch this movie and then you look at all of the appearances that Willem Dafoe has as Norman Osborn after that, all the way up to the end of Spider-Man No Way Home, then you've basically got a man who is kind of the victim of his own success in terms of the goblin serum kind of taking over and more or less just taking control of the body from Norman. So you've got the goblin versus, it really is a we talked about conflicted characters. Norman Osborn is a highly conflicted character. And I know that there has been a tendency, especially in the comics, to portray Norman Osborn as an unrepentant, sleazy, manipulative, highly intelligent, highly dangerous foe of Spider-Man's who will never change no matter which multiverse you go to. And let me tell you, some of the writers have taken that and really done a lot of excellent things with it in other Spider-Man media. But I really think that Norman Osborn in the movies, and in my opinion, the classic comics, really is a man in conflict and who, again, is the victim of his own success. And part of the reason that I want to talk about that is simply because I feel like that is probably the big note that Sam Raimi gave to Willem Dafoe when they were talking about this character. He's like, "I want you to go all out with this character, but I want you to remember at the end of the day that this guy who is going to die at the end of this movie is not an evil person all by himself. He basically has to, he takes the serum, and then suddenly the other persona emerges, the Goblin persona, and that's basically who's in control for most of the rest of the time there. And I feel like Dafoe, God, like I can't even get over how ridiculously good of an actor he is. He is gifted in the sense, like his facial expressions. Let's talk about Willem Dafoe's face just for a moment here. All right. At the beginning of the movie, he is he is Harry Osborn's father. Harry Osborn is played by James Franco, and he's Peter Parker's best friend. But he is a businessman. He is very successful. He is very proud of who he is, and he even, even though Harry may disappoint him, he he hasn't rejected Harry. He doesn't, he's not snide to him. He wants the best for his son, and he essentially is just like, just never be ashamed of who you are. When he goes to meet Peter and he, shakes his hand and smiles at him, I mean, it's very warm. It's very it's very normal. It's very much a, this is a person that I could really, like if he came up to me and smiled at me like that and was like, "Hey, nice to meet you." You like I could really get used to like, I would want to be friends with this person. And then he takes the serum, the Goblin comes out, and oh my God, the facial change that comes over Willem Dafoe, that kind of plasticity, a lot of actors don't have it. Willem Dafoe, like, I think he could give Jim Carrey a run for his money. He just his face changes entirely, like the glare, the eyebrow, the really wide kind of like serpentine smile that he has. It all comes to the forefront, and suddenly you can just tell just by looking at him that this is not Norman Osborn anymore. This is the Goblin. And I just want to give props to Willem Dafoe for carrying that quality throughout his entire performance as Norman Osborn. He is just amazing. And it looks like YT user, he said his ability to contort his face rivals Jim Carrey. Exactly, He to my knowledge, when he came back for Spider-Man No Way Home, he basically said, I don't want to wear the mask. He's like, we're not going to wear the mask, and I'll come back. And I think he also said he wanted to do his own stunts. Anyways, but like his face during No Way Home, like as soon as he like reveals himself, like it turns on a dime, and suddenly, when he's just like when he says, that's some neat trick, that sense of yours. Like his entire face has changed. All of a sudden, he's cool. He's the Goblin. And that is just all due to Willem Dafoe and that kind of asset that he brings to the role as an actor. All right, and I know I'm getting away from the original Spider-Man, but one of the nitpicks that I have about Spider-Man is that one, that Green Goblin costume really wasn't that good. But two, I mean, like it's that mask is covering his face for most of the performance, and that is that is just an asset that I wish they had the ability to kind of take away. I know that the Green Goblin wears a mask. I get it, but I just really wish that they could have really let Willem Dafoe's face do most of the work. And clearly they learned that lesson by No Way Home. I was so excited when Willem Dafoe was announced as one of the villains. I was like, oh, like yeah, they tried to keep it under wraps, but the rumor mill was very persistent, and so we all learned it kind of early. So, there were a lot of good portrayals by a lot of other characters in this movie. I wanna give a special shout out to Cliff Robertson as Uncle Ben, who did a really good job of making Uncle Ben like he, he made him into a good martyr. He made him into a good man, a pure man, and it basically gave his death a lot of meaning. Rosemary Harris was an excellent Aunt May, very much in terms of the way she looked, like from the comics. That's fine. But she was always very good at saying the thing that Peter needed to hear when he needed to hear it. She's also a good damsel in distress. Let's not forget that. That was a role that she played in the comics all the time. And speaking of damsels in distress, Kirsten Dunst as MJ needs to be rescued several times in the movie, which, you know, this day and age, I know that some people may have their issues with that. I understand it. I get it. I also happen to think that she did an excellent job of showing that there was definitely more depth to her character than just being a pretty face that needed saving. And she was very enjoyable. I don't know that I would have gone with Kirsten Dunst for that role myself at that time. However, what she brought to the table was pretty excellent. James Franco did a really good job as Harry Osborn, and I like I like Harry's arc from the first movie all the way through the third movie. But I feel like in this movie, he does a really good job of showing Harry as someone who genuinely likes Peter, but who also is not above using his power. Let's just call it that. His power to maybe get income or outcomes that are favorable to him, even if it came at some cost to Peter. Now, I will point out that at one point, I think at the beginning of the movie, when Peter is very clearly pining over MJ, Harry's like, dude, go talk to her, And Peter's like, you go talk to her. And he's like, okay, I will, And like, I understand Peter's dismay at that point, but I also am kind of like, he gave you an opening. He gave you a chance. He was trying to support you, and then because you couldn't take the shot, like, he went and did his thing. He he very much is a guy who I feel wants to do good, but as soon as it becomes inconvenient, he's not above like kind of, brushing it off. And he's also kind of a poor little rich boy. And I feel like he knows it, and that he's also powerless to get out of playing that role. So, thumbs up to James Franco. I thought he was an excellent Harry, and I think that I think that we can go ahead and move on to themes and messages that are in this movie. Spider-Man is about power and responsibility, of course, and you could claim that it's very intellectually lazy to discuss that as a theme. I think, and I know that there have been think pieces written about this as well. I think James Whitbrook has a really good article about it. But Spider-Man is about power and responsibility, and it's very specifically about the power that people can wield. And I just spoke about Harry's power and the way that he used it. He's got money, and so like whenever MJ was talking about Spider-Man and how amazing he was, you could see Harry being like, oh God, she's getting away from me. I'm gonna come over and I want to buy you something. Like that's him using his power to try to keep a hold over MJ. He does apologize to Peter for not telling him that he and MJ dated. But he did go behind Peter's back and start dating her without telling him. We can also see that even Peter is not like Peter is supposed to symbolize with great power comes great responsibility, and I get it. I totally get it. He does symbolize that for the most part, but let's not forget when he gets his spider powers, what's the first thing he thinks to do? He actually starts beating up Flash, you know. And again, like Uncle Ben said, it's not like Flash probably didn't deserve it. I'm sure that Flash bullied Peter for long before the movie started and everything. But the thing is, like, Peter was at that point faster and stronger than Flash, and basically could have just tried to get away from him, and instead chose to make Flash look weak. All right. Again, not saying that it maybe wasn't deserved, but it's, I guess what I'm trying to point out is that this is not exactly a selfless choice. It's kind of a corrupt choice. And you can say what you want about, yeah, I know, but he's just paying him back a little for everything that he had to endure. Okay. Well, then what's the next thing Peter decides to do? He decides to go make money. He's like, you know what? I'm going to impress MJ. I'm going to buy a car, so I need money for that. I'm going to go use these powers to make money. Okay? And I mean, up until his uncle dies, Peter is very much he's very much like, what can I do to capitalize on these gifts, essentially for myself, to make myself feel good. And once Uncle Ben is killed because of a screw up that he made, that changes and he becomes a lot more selfless. But I mean, I think even then he's still like uses his he will use his powers to you know talk about or not talk about to keep an eye on people when maybe he shouldn't, for example. Let's see. YT user is saying that there was a message about the integrity or about integrity too, and the cost of dishonesty. Yes, that is in the Eddie Brock fiasco in Spider-Man 3. You are correct. So, um, he is also asking, could the corrupt choice of showing him up for the benefit of entertainment, though? It made the movie better and was a key scene that people remembered about the film and enjoyed it. I'm not saying it wasn't enjoyable, and I'm also not saying that it was a bad choice for the movie. What I am saying, though, is that, you know, power is a temptation, and that temptation has the ability to corrupt. And so if you don't have the self-awareness to see it, it can have the ability of leading to bad choice. It can have the consequence of people making bad choices. And that's something that Peter comes to an awareness of as the movie progresses because of a really bad choice that he made. That suddenly kind of sobers him up and goes, okay, yeah. Norman Osborn. There's a man with power, right? And again, I'd like to point out, Norman Osborn having power is what leads to his corruption. Because again, while he's not a perfect individual, he's a good enough person that he is a victim of the Goblin. But he's also a proud enough scientist and businessman, and he has enough power to say, screw this. We're not going back to formula. We're going to test this out on me, and we're going to show that it's successful. And that, of course, led to the Green Goblin. So I think that a lot of the choices that are given to a lot of these people who have a lot of this power, is like, I feel like the movie is very much about that. It's very much about power can corrupt. You need to be careful, and you really have to, keep an eye on yourself. Otherwise, it will corrupt you. And I mean, that is an aphorism that has been used throughout the history of humanity. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I feel like Spider-Man does a really good job of playing with that notion and basically showing people, hey, watch it. You got a lot of power. Be careful how you use it. Or, of course, with great power, there must also come great responsibility. So, but I feel like that really is kind of the big overarching theme of the movie, and again, it's portrayed really well. It of course informs Spider-Man's character, and again, I feel like that a lot of the plot beats, a lot of the character beats come from the idea of this is a person with power. They're going to use it in this way, and this shows what kind of a character they are. Now, I'd like to move over to a comparison of the source material being the comics. There are a lot of changes that have been made to the Spider Man story from the comic books. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I feel like the comic books are, again, they're your source material. They're going to give the director, the producers, the writers, they're going to give them inspiration, and they're going to take a lot of elements from those from the source material, and they're going to change them and hopefully make them resonate with moviegoers in a way, in hopefully the same way that they resonated with comic book readers. And I feel like you're going to have to make some changes in order to do that. Now, what I really like about Spider Man is that we take a lot of events from Spider Man's storied career as a superhero and we basically condense a lot of them. And to me, probably one of the biggest examples of that is the scene of Spider Man having to choose between saving MJ and a car full of kids when the Green Goblin has them hanging over a bridge. That is very much the inspiration for that is very much taken from Spider-Man's fight with the Green Goblin over Gwen Stacy when he's holding her over the, oh God, I can't remember the bridge name. Oh, some people are gonna shame me for this, but that's a very famous story with a very different outcome. First of all, there was no car full of kids that Peter had to choose between. The Goblin just threw Gwen Stacy off the bridge, and Peter tried to save her, and Gwen Stacy ended up dying as a result. But we're seeing a lot of imagery that is very similar to that scene from the comic books. We've got MJ, another love interest of him, hanging high over the bridge. Goblin drops her. Spider-Man has to go and rescue her. And he does so in a way, I believe, that is very different from the way he did it in the comic book. Whereas in the comic book, he threw out a web line directly at Gwen and thwipped her. The impact from that caused her neck to snap, in the comics at least. In the movie, I believe Peter threw a web line up behind him as he dove and caught MJ, and then used the web line to swing over and then grab the car full of kids. He managed to save both, and that really angered the Goblin. But even the fight between them afterward is very, very reminiscent of that same story, because in the next issue, when Peter gets his revenge on the Green Goblin, the Goblin tries to impale Spider-Man on his glider, just as he does in the movie. Spider-Man gets out of the way, and the glider kills him. Again, a lot of this stuff taken directly from the comic books, but with just enough difference to give it its own distinctiveness as an event. We also have events like the spider that bit Peter Parker. In the comics, it was an irradiated spider that bit him as it was dying. In the movie, this is like a genetically engineered spider or genetically altered spider, and there is no talk about radiation. And I'm actually okay with this one. I feel like that's a really good change for them to make, because in 2002, we didn't fear the atomic, the outcomes of atomic energy the way that we did back in the 1960s when Spider-Man was first created. You also basically have to keep in mind that kind of at that time, one of the major fears that was going around was about genetics and the ability to change people even before they were born. And so it kind of felt like it was a good they they stuck to the fear of the times, I guess. And so you could also say that that was a theme from the movie, the fears of science and how people didn't trust Spider-Man at first, especially J. Jonah Jameson, who I would be woefully remiss not to talk about J. Jonah Jameson, as I have not done up until this point. But let's talk about J.K. Simmons and his portrayal of J. Jonah Jameson. I think it is very fitting and very telling that ever since his portrayal of this character from these movies, there has never been another actor that has portrayed J. Jonah Jameson. He has portrayed him in animated media. He has portrayed him in what he came back in Spider-Man: Far From Home, and then of course Spider-Man: No Way Home when Tom Holland and an entirely new production team was telling these stories. And I think that says something about the timelessness with which the actor has really kind of captured the essence of the character. So, but his distrust of Spider-Man, you could argue, is, it kind of it informs his distrust of superheroes in general. And you could say that that translates to a distrust in this, the science that made them what they are as well. So, anyways, J.K. Simmons in this movie looks very much like J. Jonah Jameson from the comics, and is very much kind of like, I almost feel like they took him right out of the comics and decided, we're gonna put this guy in here and make him just every bit as irascible as he was in the comics and in the movie. And I felt like that was an excellent choice that has really worked well. And audiences audiences have basically kind of spoken and said, yeah, there really is no other person who could play this character. So, um, what else? Uncle Ben's death is slightly different than the comics. There was the like he was killed off panel in the comics. Peter just comes home and a cop tells him, "Your uncle's been shot, murdered," and that's all there is to it. In the movie, Peter basically finds Uncle Ben after he's been shot. He's lying in the street, car's gone, and Peter watches him die. It was a very heart-wrenching scene, and I feel like it was an excellent choice made by the production staff. They did a really good job of showing why Uncle Ben meant so much to Peter, and why his death fueled the amount of rage that it did in the immediate aftermath. Finally, we're going to talk a little bit about the comic book comparisons of Norman Osborn and the Green Goblin. One thing that is notably absent is the mystery of who the Green Goblin is. Now, to be fair, Peter doesn't discover who the Green Goblin is until the end of the movie, whereas Norman kind of figures it out about two-thirds of the way into the movie. But the idea that the Green Goblin could have been just about anyone was kind of an early tease in the comic books. In the Green Goblin's first appearance, you don't find out who he is. They very deliberately keep his face hidden when he's not in costume, and basically they kind of really tease the comic book readers with, who is this guy? He keeps coming back. He torments Peter, and eventually, I believe the Green Goblin finds Spider-Man, unmasks him, and then reveals himself to Spider-Man in this really big, like, it's Norman Osborn, it's my best friend's father. And like up until that point, there had just been basically a who, a who is it? There was a real tease for readers. There really wasn't much emphasis on that in this movie. It was a lot about Peter's origin story. It was a lot about Norman's development as the villain. There was no real mystery to movie-going audiences as to who this character was. But I do feel they took the similarity of Norman being just a businessman and really kind of making it so that he really is a victim of the serum. He is a victim of his own success. He's a victim of the Goblin who only emerges after he takes the serum. And I thought that was a very smart decision that really kind of made for a compelling villain who we got to see back in 2002 and then again in 2021 in Spider-Man No Way Home. It was an excellent decision and really kind of was a good call by the movie makers to kind of keep those elements from the Green Goblin and then kind of getting rid of the whole whodunit mystery kind of thing. So in conclusion, I would like to say that the Spider-Man film is it's definitely one of the better ones. And that's not an easy thing to say given that there are now so many Spider-Man movies and so many good Spider-Man movies. I've said on this podcast that I am going to eventually do a tier list of all of the Spider-Man movies and the adjacent ones, including Venom and Morbius and, the ones that people may be like, why are you watching these? Because they're adjacent to the character and I want them kind of all in one place. If you were to ask me what tier rating I would give 2002's Spider-Man by Sam Raimi, I would actually give it an A tier rating. I would say that this is up there. This is an excellent start to the Spider-Man mythos on film. And I feel like they really did, like the movie's success bears it out. I know they made a lot of money. It was the most successful superhero movie that was made at the time. I remember watching it myself and just loving it. I just was so happy coming out of the movie and basically saying, oh my God, this is so good. Again, I saw it several times in the theaters. I can't tell you how many times I've watched it since just for the pure enjoyment of it. I think Tobey Maguire gives an excellent performance, as does Willem Dafoe, as does J.K. Simmons, and really the entire cast. Sam Raimi knew what he was doing when he made this movie. And I really kind of can't, while I can't make it an S tier, it is a very, very good Spider-Man movie and definitely one worth watching. So I think that when I finally do get around to doing my Spider-Man movies tier list episode of this podcast, that's where you can expect to see Spider-Man get placed in that tier list. And again, this is a movie that is worth seeing. If you like Spider-Man, even if you just like good superhero movies, this is highly recommended, totally worth watching. You'll enjoy it. You might even cry in certain places. And hopefully that will be a sign of just how much effort and love that the cast and crew put into this film. I think it definitely deserves its high rating, and I cannot wait to see how other movies are going to compare to this one on the tier list. All right, and I believe we are done with that segment, so I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I believe that brings us to the end of the show. If you enjoyed this episode of The Webline, please be sure to like and subscribe to the podcast on my YouTube channel, simply named Spidey Librarian. The Webline is also available on audio services, so when you see us on Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or any other such service, please leave a review, a rating, and a follow if you can. You can find me on my socials under the name Spidey Librarian on Twitter, Instagram, WordPress, and Twitch. And finally, if you'd like to shoot me an email, you can contact me at spideylibrarian@gmail.com, where I'll be happy to hear your thoughts, rants, and ideas. Who knows? Your email might be featured in an upcoming episode. Be sure to join us live next Sunday on the Webline, where we'll be doing another tier list. The subject, Spidey's many, many suits and costumes over the years. Thank you for listening, and until the next episode, I'll be wishing you a good day. Bye!